Love finances the other F word and want to support the show? Become a patron by going to patreon.com/FTOFW. You'll get special features, a shout out on the air, and early releases. Or if you prefer, pick up some merchandise at financestheotherfword.com.
As fantastic a CFP as Mel O is, as wonderful an attorney as I am, and as good as Stormy is at whatever it is he does, please do note that anything said in our podcasts are our opinions alone and are not meant to be taken as financial or legal advice.
Welcome to Finances, the Other F Word, a Gen Xer podcast for musicians and music lovers, where we discuss money and music without all the pretentious bullshit. Here are your hosts, Zoe Terry, attorney at large, Stormy Andrews, founder of Yokel Local Marketing, and Mel O, certified financial planner and author of Finances, the Other F Word. Listener discretion is advised.
Hey guys, welcome to Finances the Other F Word, and today on the podcast we are going to revisit episode 139, and we're rolling out a series on the economics of discrimination. We are still at home in quarantine. I'm seeing my co-host smiling faces on Zoom because obviously we're never going to fucking be within hugging range of each other ever again, but through all of this, Stormy has fantastic news. Stormy, share with us your news.
What? I got to share my news already?
Yes.
Yeah, it's pretty exciting. So my brand new book launched Amazon and bookstores, and it's taken over the #1 and the #2 best-selling spot for new releases, which is awesome.
What?
I didn't expect that to happen. That's what I'm saying, because we haven't even done a launch party yet. But yeah, the hardcover is the #1 spot for new releases. The soft the paperbacks in the #2 spot. So what is this book I'm talking about, and why is it taking over the world by storm? Well, let me tell you about it. The book is called The World's Best Buyer Persona System. And it is so timely because I started writing this book well before COVID. I just want you to know that, right? But the book just came out, and I think the magic or the success of the book is because it's really helping organizations determine how their customers are thinking. You see, they used to market to their customers one way.
Behaviors have changed. Behaviors have changed. The way we think has changed. Just everything that we're doing has shifted, right? It's a whole new paradigm than what it's been before. So the problem is, for many organizations, what they're starting to discover is if they continue their messaging the way they've had their messaging in the past, it may not be effective because their messaging hasn't shifted along with the consumers of their goods and services. So the magic of the World's Best Buyer Persona System is it helps you reimagine a buyer persona, but more importantly, it helps you understand how your customers are thinking. It takes you through exercise. So regardless of the economic or the medical catastrophe that we're in right now with COVID, it really doesn't matter what's going on as long as you're willing to go through the exercise and reevaluate your ideal customers where they're at today. It will allow you to shift your thinking and take your business to the next level. So, the book just came out July 10th. There's been no publicity. There's been no advertising. And yesterday it hit #1 and #2. Earlier today, I was interviewed by HubSpot on this particular topic. I've got more interviews scheduled for next week because it's something that is so important right now. And it's proven. It's just not theory. This is stuff that we've been using for years that has made our clients millions of dollars. As a matter of fact, I'm going to share this. When COVID hit, our business, Yokel Local, our revenue dropped 57%. So 57%, you see, when COVID hit, our business, we took a hit, 57% hit to the bottom line. A lot of organizations, they had to stop. It put them out of business temporarily. So we're like, what do we do? This is a huge, huge hit to the bottom line. And we were operating in the red. So we had to use the principles which are shared in the World's Best Buyer Persona System. And we started applying it to our business. We had to change our messaging to our ideal clients. And guess what? This month in July, when did COVID hit? I believe
March.
It hit us March. So April, red. May, red. June, red. July, we're back in the black. As a matter of fact, next month in August, not only will we be in the black, we will be beyond our post-COVID numbers.
Nice. So you'll be in
Which
the
is pretty awesome.
black or black.
Absolutely. We will be in the black or black. And what it's allowed us to do is hire some more employees. So we're hiring right now. We hired 2 employees, which start next week. We have a 3rd employee, which starts August 3rd. And then we're about to put an ad for another employee. And it's following this process. So it's something that's not designed to be an overnight fix by no stretch of the imagination. But what it's designed to do is it puts you on a plan. So if you start executing that plan and start changing your messaging, it puts you on a plan to success. And it takes about 90 days for this stuff to start working. And the world's best buyer persona system, in effect, becomes the hub of your marketing wheel, of your marketing engine. It is pretty awesome. And because of that, like I said, being number 1 and number 2 bestsellers on Amazon for the new releases, I guess that's not a bad place to be.
No, and to kind of yay and
Yay.
so to kind of
Yay.
sum up the world's best buyer persona, because Zoe and I went through, when we first met Stormy, we went through it, and it helps you identify specifically the exact ideal client that you want, and then it allows you to formulate very targeted marketing strategies to basically gear towards those people. And that's actually kind of funny, because that's one of the things we're going to talk about on redlining today. But that's awesome. Number 2 and number 1 on Amazon. That's fucking sweet. So congratulations on that. And I'm sure that he'll stay number 1 for a while. So we are going to get right into redlining. Okay, so in episode 139, Being Black in America and the Economics of Discrimination, that aired, I believe it was June 4th, we had a conversation with Derek Reynolds and Stormy, of course, your co-host that all of you love more than Zoe and I, about what it was like to be Black in America, or in Stormy's case, to be Black and then be mixed in America. And one of the things that we touched on at the very, very end of that episode, I encourage you to go back and listen to it if you haven't, is the economics of racial discrimination. And I really thought that this was important and that we needed to come back to this and we needed to talk, because a lot of times when we're talking about systemic racism, it's not specifically something that somebody might have not purposely put into the system to discriminate, even though we did talk about the Fair Housing Act that came out after the Depression, about how on that podcast, episode 139, where the appraisers who went out, they were biased and they were racist, and they did write that into their appraisals and told the Fair Housing Authority where not to do mortgages to, where not to, the people basically not to give mortgages to. And we talked a little bit about the fallout from that. So there's redlining is in multiple ways. We talked about it in life insurance. We also talked about it in the grocery stores, where if you have an area that is densely populated with one ethnicity that maybe prefers one type of food or drink more than a ethnicity in another location, then what you will see a lot of times still to this day, unfortunately, is that the grocery store will take that specific item. So for instance, I'm just coming to my mind, if you have a Jewish, community and they need kosher food, then you will see that kosher food in that specific area will be more expensive than, say, if you drove 5 miles out of the Jewish neighborhood. And that happens with blacks and Hispanics and poor whites. I mean, it happens with a lot of stuff. And so when we left off and we talked about the redlining, we talked about how it wasn't until 1975 that we finally started seeing that the redlining in the mortgage industry was actually uncovered and the veil was pulled back. And they did go, oh yeah, there are certain areas that are lined in red where we do not lend to. And we had talked about the fact that my roommate was telling me about slavery, and I was telling her, hey, you should get over that. And then when I realized it was so close, because you're thinking of it in the 1800s, et cetera. And then when I look at some of these financial reforms, these are coming out in the 70s still. So this stuff is very recent. And if you are an Xer like us on this podcast, then you have lived through many of these times, even if you were maybe too young to comprehend them. So I wanted to look at redlining in the aspect of credit cards. And so when you redline, it's not about just specifically mortgages. It can also be about targeting a certain group and excluding them from different ways that they can maintain credit. And so there was a Community Reinvestment Act that was passed up in 1977, and it basically was forcing banks to lend to low and moderate income people and to try to give people more of an opportunity to get credit. So if some of you out there, or most of us know, we've had big financial situations that have came through in our life, and if you don't have the savings account to back that shit up, well, you got to turn to credit or you turn to a family member. But if you're in a poor demographic, your family members aren't really going to have the money to help you out. And that's where having credit comes in to be a big deal. And so out of the Community Reinvestment Act, they were trying to get banks to lend to the areas in which they had branches. And when this originally came out, it had to do with credit cards. We were at a time in our history in the 70s. We did a podcast on the inflation, runaway inflation in the 70s. And so the Community Reinvestment Act put in certain things to help give more people credit. And at the time, it was actually better for you to use credit than to try to save up for a big purchase item. Say if you wanted that television or you wanted a new living room. If you're in a situation where there's runaway inflation, it's actually going to be better for you at that time to buy the item right then than to wait and see the price go up tomorrow. So that's how inflation works. And like I said, in that podcast episode where we covered the 70s, we talked all about the runaway inflation. And so with the extension of this, they were trying to get more people on board. And so back in the day, before we had the Visa and MasterCards and things like that, we had Sears and JCPenney's, and they were the two biggest lenders as far as credit goes. And they were not restrictive to the people who got them: white, black, Hispanic, low, moderate, high income people. And they were actually very, very level and very equal all the way across the board. And as a result of that, half of Americans at the time had a Sears card and 1/3 of them had a JCPenney's card. My grandparents had both. Did your parents?
My first credit card was a Sears card. My first job was at Sears too.
Yeah, I'm kind of sad after when I read more about JCPenney's and Sears, and we're going to talk about Sears a little bit more. I'm really sad that they're basically closing and going into BK because of the simple fact that they did a lot for the African American community as a result of some of the initiatives that they rolled out, and we'll come back and we'll kind of talk to that. And so what happened is that you had these different regulations that came out where they're trying to give people more access to credit. And at the time, it was really, really great. Well, they had parameters on how much money that you could charge for, above like a certain amount as far as for interest rates on credit cards. Now, for those of you who have Visa and MasterCards, a lot of times if you have decent credit, you're probably, if you have an introductory rate, you could be at 0% or you could be at 7%. But there is a lot of people out there who are having 22, 27, 28% credit card interest rates. And if you ever go into like a Best Buy or an Old Navy or a TJ Maxx and you get a credit card through them, we've talked about this on the credit episode, these are credit department store cards and they're always going to run you double digits. Always. So you really have to evaluate if that shirt you want to charge is really going to be worth it. And that's why, of course, if you go into Kohl's, they're always trying to heavily encourage you to get credit. Now, but what they ended up doing is in the poor neighborhoods and the predominantly black neighborhoods is that when this regulation came out, they couldn't charge them as much at the time. So what they did was they started taking and they started severely marking up televisions and furnitures at much higher markups in those demographics and those communities than they would in, say, a white community. And this is just not blacks. This is blacks, Hispanics, this is poor whites. I mean, this is all the way across the board. And so what they did was they used that as a way, well, we can't charge XYZ interest rates because of the CRA. So what we're going to do is we're going to just put these things up to huge markups and then offer easy credit. So even though they had a kind of a restraint on the interest rate of the credit card, the dollar price of the items was actually higher. So in effect, they're still redlining. I mean, you're still taking a demographic, you're still taking a location, and you're still treating them unfairly across the board. And that's what redlining is. And so what ended up happening was that the CRA comes through and they start being able to try to iron out a lot of these issues that we're having with blacks getting credit and also with women. And I came across this, and I'll put all the resources in the show notes. So back in the day, lending discrimination against women and people of color was just completely blatant. And mortgage lenders would usually only consider a woman's income if they were convinced that she wouldn't get pregnant. And so they would ask for this. I didn't know this was a thing. They would ask for baby letters from this is the underwriter.
Baby daddy?
Nope, close though. I guess it could be depending on who it is. From the woman's doctor, explaining the type of birth control that she was on, and some of the banks even demanded affidavit. And this is from Forbes, you guys, so this isn't some bullshit crazy article. Some of the banks actually demanded affidavits that were signed by both the husband and wife that if they had an unplanned pregnancy, they promised to get an abortion.
Shocking.
Interesting.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wait, and when was this?
This was it doesn't give a time. It's just predating the CRA, so it would be predating 1970s. So it looks like it was probably like 60s was when that they had to do this. And then what they would do is they would, instead of saying, I don't want to lend you because you're black, what they would do is they can deny you because if they viewed you as offering, if they viewed you as having a lack of harmonious home life or a good reputation. Now, this is the thing that kills me with this. For us Xers, when we grew up, we didn't have the internet until high school, most of us. And then, mine was junior high. And then we didn't have social media till we were we were probably in our late 20s, early 30s by the time social media blew up. With all this shit and all these girls that are shaking their ass on social media, could you imagine if an underwriter could just be like, yeah, I saw your TikTok. There's no fucking way I'm lending to you. It's completely crazy. So redlining is, again, not just specifically on black Americans. This is on women too and other races, and it's fucking insane. So
I do have a serious question. I just got to ask you because you gave me a really good idea. So, for those of you that don't know, my wife and I are going through a divorce, so I'll be back in the dating scene, right? Do you think I can draft a letter that if someone gets pregnant, I got nothing to do? Can I draft that letter? Would that be acceptable in today's dating scene?
That's a legal question, Zoe.
One of those letters.
What's the letter saying? That if there's an unexpected pregnancy,
I want an indemnification letter of the pregnancy.
Like a release. Before you get on this, I want some kind of waiver or release.
A waiver. Can you write one of those for me? I can sell them.
Oh, bless you. Bless your little heart.
Okay, so first of all, let me point out a couple things. That number one, Stormy at 50 thinks his sperm is still viable. So let's just address that issue first right now.
He's a number one and number two and
number one and number two.
That's right. That's fucking bestseller sperm right there. And number two, you guys will remember on our life insurance episode, one of the things that Zoe reported on is David Lee Roth had an insurance policy against his sperm just for that reason. So if he got somebody knocked up, then basically they would pay them to go away. So maybe you should call David Lee Roth and ask who his insurance person was and maybe try to go through that way. That's what I'm thinking.
I'm sure it was Lloyd's of London, actually.
I'm going to call Lloyd's of London, too.
Yep, it was Lloyd's of London.
Can I get? There it is.
Yeah, but we'll keep, in the meantime, we'll
circle back. I'll keep you all posted.
Yes.
Please do.
Yes. I'm sure our listeners are on the edge of their seat wanting to know how your sperm comes out.
I'm just picturing Stormy's bed and the bedside table, a stack of waivers and releases and some pens. Surely condoms too, I would hope. And then, I don't know. I'll move on because I want my mind to be cleared of that image.
Did you guys ever watch Dave Chappelle? I don't think you did, Zoe. Did you, Stormy?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I've seen some.
Okay. Do you remember the skit where he's in bed with the girl and he's making her sign a release before they have sex so that she can't come back and say that he raped her? And in there. Oh yeah, it's a hilarious skit. It sounds awful, but it's fucking hilarious. And in the skit, he's like, "Oh, initial here for oral," and she looks at him, and he's like, "I'm gonna do you too." And she's like, "All right," she initials, and he's like, "And initial here for anal," and she's like, "No." And it's hilarious. If I find it on YouTube, I'm gonna have to post it. But that's exactly what it made me think of.
Absolutely.
But anyway, so yeah, so enough of Stormy's sperm. Let's move on from that. So so as a result of all of this stuff that was happening in the 60s and the lack of, promiscuous women being able to bear children in marriage, whatever, the Equal Credit Opportunity Act of 1974 came around as a result of the 1970s Civil Rights Act. And it came out and it said that lenders could no longer discriminate on the basis of race, national origin, gender, or marital status. And it was passed in 1977. That was passed with the Community Reinvestment Act was passed on that back, and forcing, as a piggyback to that, for required banks to issue low to income and middle income people loans, as well as people living in low income neighborhoods. So this was all fine and good. And then what we had in 1978. So I want you guys to really focus on the years that all of this shit is going on, because if you mistakenly think, like I did, that racism and or slavery is so far back in our history that there's no way that a lot of the systemic stuff can still be built in the system. And we as people on this host and probably listeners, we didn't build this into the system, but that doesn't mean it's not there. And that doesn't mean that the first part of acknowledging it and fixing it is understanding that this shit is just recent as fuck, and that it's not way back in the 1800s, and a lot of the discrimination and the Jim Crow laws and shit that I thought was so far back in our history. No, motherfuckers, this is 1978. So in 1978, there was the Supreme Court ruled in a case, Marquette National Bank of Minneapolis versus First of Omaha Service Corp. And basically what had happened is that as a result of the Equal Credit Opportunity Act and the Community Reinvestment Act, they had all of these individual states had written in all of these credit card laws that basically said, hey, you can't fuck people. Okay. And you need to invest in the communities in which you have branches and, et cetera, et cetera. And because the whole point of it is to give more Americans access to credit. Well, and I don't know specifically about that case, but what that case actually did was it no longer tied the banks to be held responsible for the credit laws that were written in the state that they had branches. So, for instance, if you have Wells Fargo, it's based out of San Francisco, but they have branches in Nevada. Prior to this, they would have to fall under the lines of the Nevada state rules and regulations as far as lending for credit. And then if for branches in California, they'd have to do that. Well, then what happened is by this Supreme Court decision, they said, yeah, fuck that. That's all gone away. So now wherever you claim is your home for your bank, that's the only rules that you have to be held liable to. And so what ended up happening was a whole bunch of banks moved their home branches to South Dakota, because South Dakota at the time was trying to get a whole bunch of banking and finances into the state. So they had very favorable regulations and tax laws. And so we saw a lot of banks move their headquarters to South Dakota. And then, because now they didn't have to be liable to the state that they were at, they were able to mail out now all of these credit card applications and these pre-approvals across zip codes. And then what happened is we start seeing that all of the credit card restraints on the interest rates are now kind of fallen by the wayside. And the state level regulations only still applied to payday lenders and some auto lenders, so basically if they had a storefront. But then anything else that could be offered by mail or over the internet was free game. And that's kind of where we are right now. And so what we've seen is, as a result of that, we have seen that they are able to target a much broader area with less regulations. And so this is the stuff I'm talking about, you guys. When we're talking about things that are built into the system that don't have anything to do with us as individuals, doesn't mean that the stuff is not there. And as part of the original CRA, Community Reinvestment Act rules that came down, banks could get brownie points to basically extend extra limits to people, like basically increase their limits, and then they could also increase their interest rates. So what would end up happening is that we see, since they have their claws in people who are not necessarily, so like if you're a bank and you have a poor community, do you really want to have let's take Wells Fargo, for instance. I fucking work there. We talked about Wells Fargo. If Wells Fargo has an underperforming bank that takes overhead and takes a lease to pay and electricity and tellers and customer service reps and all of those other people in a poorer area, does it make sense or behoove the bank to stay open? No. And that's exactly what happened. As they said, well, we can reach all these other people now, because now we don't have to be bound by these regulations. So we're just going to close branches in communities that are lower or middle income. And so what we start seeing is the reverse of the branches start coming out of those communities. They can't go in, they can't get loans. And let's take a broader look on this. And we're talking about the lack of accessibility of credit. If you live in a poor community and you are subject to grocery stores that are paying, charging you higher for certain foods, and redlining of numerous varieties that we've already talked about, if you can't get a loan to get a car, and you can't put your money in a bank to start saving it to get a car, then you can't drive out of that area and go somewhere else to try to get better credit. And so what we start seeing is this continuous loop. And this is where a lot of the systemic discrimination from an economic standpoint gets built into the system and then exacerbates itself out. And so what ended up happening was, back in the day when interest rates were much higher, when prime was much higher, it was well worth the banks to be able to take deposits from people, even if they were living paycheck to paycheck, because their dollar amounts were very, there was a prime rate was very high. We've talked about on the FDIC insurance episode that the way that banks lend is based on their deposit balances. So when you have a bank that is flush with deposit balances, according to the FDIC regulations, they are then allowed to turn around and lend more of that money out, and then they get money they double dip on both sides. We've talked about how they do that on the savings account side and on the lending side, and they're able to lend more money out. So when interest rates are very high, you want to take every dollar from everybody you can, even if the motherfucker's $100, okay? But what ended up happening is, as a result of this, as soon as all of this stuff got put into place, all of a sudden we see inflation turns around and we see everything kind of go on its head. And what happens is then you start seeing where the banks are going, you know what, I don't really want you, Mr. Paycheck to Paycheck guy, because now the rates are not in my favor. So if you're saving, if you have a $500 savings account, we don't need your deposits anymore because it's not worth it for us. And not only that, we're going to turn away your deposits by basically making it that for some low balances, you have higher monthly service fees. And I saw it. I saw it at Wells Fargo. And Wells Fargo's not the only bank that does it, guys. If you think that fucking Citibank didn't do that shit, and you think that, Bank of America didn't do that shit, that's all bullshit. They all have pretty much the same thing. And it is true that for people who have that, the lower income deposits, if the income is too low and there's not other regulations that are actually met, then they will charge you the service fees. And so what we see all of this stuff kind of cannibalizing itself when it's designed to try to help people. And it's just a shit show. And so they were trying to combat credit deserts, where basically there'd be big swaths of the community that had no access to credit. And then what ended up happening is, when everything turned around, it kind of got fucked up. And the banks just basically said, you know what? I don't want to pay to supply these banks. It no longer is advantageous for me to take your deposits, Mr. Middle American. And so we're going to pull out, and, good for nothing. See you. And all of this came about by this decision that just came out in 1977. Now, a lot of you guys might remember in the 1980s, I was way too young, but my grandparents got them all the time. They would send you a credit card in the mail. Do you remember that, Stormy?
I remember that. That was before the 80s, because, I graduated from high school in 87, but I remember there was a time in my life where they would send credit cards in the mail. I'm like, this is pretty cool.
Yeah, and
I think it was probably the 2000s, 90s, somewhere right around that time frame.
maybe it was maybe I have my decades, but so what they would do now, they send you a piece of cardboard that says like Discover.
It looks like one.
Yeah, and you get all, but in the day, you guys, it was a fucking real credit card. And so when you activated that motherfucker and you charged on it, you just accepted their terms. Like literally it was that easy. And the reason why they stopped doing that is because there was, and I can't remember the lawsuit, and it was one of my banking classes back in the day, is that there was a lawsuit where, I don't know if it was a class action or one person, whatever, said, well, this is a gift. I didn't ask for this credit card. You sent me out this credit card. This is a gift. And they won.
Did they really?
Yes. And so the credit card companies are like, well, fuck, now we can't send out these credit cards anymore because it's considered a gift. So now we're still going to get you excited to open the fucking thing with this little cardboard sticky thing, but we're not going to be sending you a real credit card. And so this is all stuff that's just recently in effect, you guys. It's fucking hilarious. And what we end up seeing is that when they do end up trying to lend to lower income or lower credit score customers, that just gives them the ability to run the interest up much, much higher. And we talked about how credit worked on one of our podcasts that we did in December, and I can't remember what number it was. Go look it up. It's on our website, finances.com, and you guys can listen to all of them. And then what we saw is when we started doing a switch, like, Capital One, what's in your wallet, right? Citi Card, they had a branch that did this where they specifically targeted people who had really bad credit. And what ended up happening was that there was a research done by the National Bureau of Economic Research, that group, between 2008 and 2010 during the peak of the financial crisis, and banks earned 7.9% of profit margins on subprime credit card customers. So we talked about subprime mortgages being people that could not prove their income and had shit credit. Well, this is the same exact thing, except it's a subprime credit card market. And at the height of the financial crisis, these bastards are still pulling in 7.9% profit margins on the backs of these people who need to rebuild their credit because maybe their home got foreclosed on. And you guys, the moratorium from the COVID relief package expires this month. Okay. So this shit could be right around the corner again. We don't really know. And it turned out that in fact that those financially stressed customers were the most profitable customer segments, and earning banks more than double the profit margin than they earned off of customers who were better off with better credit and made more money. So what we're still seeing, yeah. It's fucking crazy, dude. I will put all the resources and you guys can read through it. And this is very important because out of the 2009 or 2010, they passed Dodd-Frank, the Dodd-Frank Act, which the administration has been dismantling piece by piece, which makes me vilely sick. And in the Dodd-Frank Act, one of the things that happened is that the Dodd-Frank came out as part of the recovery for 2008, and they said, hey, you know what, guys? You banks, you can't keep fucking people on overdraft fees, and so now we're going to change the game. So let me explain to you how the banking system used to work. Now, I'm going to talk about Wells Fargo because that's where I worked. Okay, that's one of the banks I worked at. It's the last bank I worked at. So what Wells Fargo would do is, let's say that you have a car insurance check, okay, or car insurance debit, not a check because nobody knows what those are anymore. And then you go to Burger King, and then you go, I don't know, get some dog food, and then you go buy a pair of shoes. Okay, what all banks did, not just Wells Fargo, all the major banks did, is that let's say that you did not have enough money to clear all of those items. So instead of going, what they would say is they would say, well, the biggest item is the one that we're going to clear for you because we think that's probably the most important. Stormy already sees where I'm going with this, because we think that's the most important item, because that could be a rent check, that could be your mortgage, that could be car insurance. So we're going to pay this item and overdraw you, and then we're going to bounce the 3 items behind you. Okay, so this is how Wells Fargo worked pre-Dodd-Frank Act, and I lived through this, you guys. So this is no bullshit. You would get a $35 charge at the time for every single overdraft item that you did, even if it was a penny. So it pays, the bank pays this bigger item on your behalf, but you still don't have enough money. So that's $35. Then the dog food and the shoes and your Burger King order come through. That's $35 for each of those. So now you're well over $100 in fees. And then what would happen is every single item past that Every single day that comes in, you get charged $5 a day as long as you carry a negative balance. And then all of these domino transactions would just come through. Now, if you're living on a fixed income, what happens is that before you can even be back to zero, you have to pay over $100 just to get back to zero and still not have any fucking money to pay for all of the rest of these items. And then what would happen is that they close the account on you because you're so far deep in overdraft fees, because then you have other automatic debits that people either go and get a payday loan, which we haven't even talked about in this podcast, which are horrific, to bring their account back up to positive so that they would continue to have a bank account, or their account is so far in the negative that their direct deposit comes through and all of their paycheck is eaten up paying back all of these previous overdraft fees. And when they originally told me about this highest price ticket, I was like, oh, that makes sense. And then I was like, wait a minute. I'm like, you greedy asshole bastards. And let's put it this way, guys, the 1%, they're not bouncing shit, okay? They're not fucking bouncing shit. But all of us guys down here, sometimes we fuck up and we bounce shit. You know, maybe not Stormy, but I can tell you that I've bounced stuff before.
Let me say, I'm bouncing the ladies.
You're down to the ladies. What?
Well, isn't there?
Let's not think about it.
Wait. How does it go? Some of the new songs are like, I'm going to bounce. How does it go? I got to get my terminology right now. You know, I'm going to bounce.
Oh, I know what song you're talking about, but I don't know.
Oh, man.
Will Smith, bounce with you.
No,
yeah,
it's.
I'm working on my terminology. I'm getting, I've
No,
got
that's
terminology
jiggy.
from the 80s when unibrows were in.
Unibrows were never in.
Yeah, you need some
No.
updating.
Yeah. So anyway, so then when the Dodd-Frank Act came through as part of the financial reform that we desperately needed and need after the 2008 crisis, what happened is they came in and they told banks, you can't do that shit no more. And so then what happened is that the people had to opt in for a service that would pay their bills for them, that would allow them to be negative. And then what would happen is they could only, at this time at Wells Fargo, and it since went up, you guys, that they could only charge $15 per overdrafts, and they could only overdraft you twice a day, and they could not charge you the $5 anymore. Okay. And that was part of the Dodd-Frank Act. So if you think about this through the lens of communities that are lower income and mid income, and the middle class, you guys, is disappearing, this is very important to you, because it's not, again, about black people and being discriminatory against them. It's also about poor people and poor white people and poor Hispanic people and poor, etc. Insert American here, right? And so what ended up happening is we ended up having the reverse effect of what they were trying to do, and we ended up driving a lot of Americans more into debt through the credit cards. And the last thing that we'll talk about, and this is something that Stormy was just kind of talking about doing the buyer persona and getting very clear on who it is specifically that you were trying to target. Well, back in the day, going back to Sears, in the 80s, we would always get Sears catalogs, and they were like telephone books, and they were glorious. Did you get those, Zoe, in England?
I spent all my time in the bra section.
Did you?
They were hot.
Yeah,
Gross.
I'm sure the models were just super sexy.
I was a junior high kid.
Yeah, your
That was
grandma.
like the coolest thing ever. I'm like,
That-
I'm getting away with something.
That's way before Victoria's Secrets, you guys. So these are like standard bras.
I hit the Sears catalog.
Yeah, that's actually, there's an episode of The Simpsons where Mo talks about that, but I digress. Well, you didn't get the Sears catalog, Zoe? Okay.
I never got the Sears catalog? Oh, my goodness.
No, because I lived in England.
Yeah, but still, I thought it was. Oh, anyway. Okay, so the Sears catalog was magical, and I would go through there at Christmas time as an only child, and I would circle everything I want, which is usually like 400 items, like a dumbass, and expect to get them, which of course never happened, unfortunately. The thing that was cool about Sears, besides the fact that they actually offered a level playing field when they gave credit to people of all races, with the rollout of the Sears catalog, they actually helped a lot of the African Americans in the time of the Jim Crow. When, think of a pandemic right now, think of Amazon. People don't want to go outside. We're in the middle of a pandemic, so they shop on Amazon. They get it delivered to their door. Well, back in the time of Jim Crow, there was a Sears catalog. It allowed black people to order items at the same prices that whites were paying when, if they had went into their local store, the local store, just based on the fact that they were black, would have charged them huge interest rates on their credit just because of their racially discriminating against them. But in the Sears catalog, everybody was on a level playing field, and even Sears, to their credit, which makes me so sad they're going away now, is that they had instructions to help black people how to order things from the Sears catalog through the post office so that they wouldn't have to expose themselves to unnecessary dangers or, going into different retail establishments. And apparently white people were so pissed off about the Sears catalog that they were burning them in the street, which is just hilarious to me. And so in pandemic times, think of our new Sears catalog as being Amazon. And so now what the big uproar is, and Stormy, would love for you to weigh in on this, is that there's now a big concern that because we have all of this rampant giving credit to people, and there is some statistic out there that I read that I cannot remember it now, and I don't want to misquote it, about how much in debt the average American is, and it's bullshit. But so because social media platforms such as Facebook, which is the biggest one out there, their metrics and the way that they hone in on demographics, the information that they know about you just from places you check in at, people you hang out with, things that you comment on, they're actually getting in a situation where they are beginning to be very super targeted to the types of credit that they will offer certain people. And as a way of doing that, they are actually excluding people. So if you have a black demographic and you're trying to push this certain credit card on them with a very high interest rate, you're going to offer that credit card to that demographic, but not to a white person or a Hispanic person or something like that. And then what is happening is that they're finding that they can get around those fair lending guidelines that say, hey, you can't discriminate against race and you can't discriminate against income. But what you can do is you can just not even let those people know that there's a better option credit card out there. And so this is the big stink right now. And I'm going to let you jump in here in a second, Stormy. But what's actually on the rack right now is that banks and non-bank financial services institutions. So think of your I'm trying to think of Synchronicity Bank. So
right.
Yeah, so they're a financial place, but they're not a bank. Okay, they are currently looking to see if they can take all of these footprints and all of this third-party data that they're all sharing and all of these cookies and all this stuff we're putting on social media and see if they can use that to put in an algorithm to determine if the person is credit-worthy or not. And this is very dangerous, you guys. And this is the same thing that we're seeing happening in car insurance right now. So I think it is Liberty Mutual and the one with Flo, the brown-haired lady. Progressive. They have a thing that you can put in your car, and then you basically have to drive around like an angel for 90 days, and then they're going to give you a discount on your car insurance, and they will give you up to a 5% discount. Well, this is the deal, you guys. The way insurance works, and we talked about this on the life insurance, and this goes for car insurance, and this goes for disability insurance, is that the one thing you have going for you is the rule of numbers. And the rule of numbers says that we have a huge amount of a population. Some of them are going to drive like shit, like Zoe, and some of them are going to drive awesome. And what's going to end up happening is that the shit drivers and the good drivers are going to balance each other out, but they're not going to isolate Zoe because it's the rule of numbers. And so because of that, you have, some people paying a little more, some people paying a little less. Well, when you put those tracking devices into your car, what you're doing is you're starting to give them data to be very specific on it circumvents the whole rule of numbers. And I'm not saying that's good or bad. I'm just telling you that that's one of the things that you need to be on the lookout for. And so, like I said, the big deal right now is all of the tracking methods that are put in place, and the concern that they are now going to start being used to determine if you're credit worthy, while at the same time they have an overlay of not offering these certain credit lines to people of color and or women, or quite frankly LGBTQ. If you're a lender, we see it. We've Hobby Lobby, we see Chick-fil-A. They do not like LGBTQ communities. They've made it quite clear that's not in their belief system. Well, what if that's in a credit card system? And I go back to this again. When we talked about churches and we talked about them being tax exempt, the reason why the court said that they had to stay tax exempt is because they said that they could not have a government person in power come in and use the tax law to discriminate against a certain religion. That was their basis of it. Well, this is the same thing that's happening now, but it's happening with all of these other things. So what are your thoughts on that, Stormy?
Yep. Oh, you want more?
No, you've been holding your phone for like 10 minutes. I was like, oh, he's about to drop some shit.
No, you're absolutely right. Anyone who thinks it's kind of funny when I hear people, I'm gonna go back to the people who were bitching and complaining about contact tracing. I don't know if you saw that on social media, and I'll make the tie-in here in just a moment. But I saw, comments on social media saying, if you're going to do the contact tracing, just delete me as your friend right now, which is ridiculous, right? Because I don't want them to know what I'm doing or where I'm at. And every time I see someone say that, and they're using a platform like Facebook, I think it's the funniest thing ever. Because if you really don't want anyone to know where you're at and you're against this technology, send a letter. Or send it by pigeon, because once you decide to pick up this little thing that I'm holding right now, a mobile phone, and do anything, they know exactly what you're doing. As a matter of fact, Google can put a profile. I've got Google, I've got Apple. Now I just don't care because Google, Apple, going back to the insurance, I'll tell you what Tesla's doing, which is kind of funny, because they're going to have their own insurance. And it's based on your driving habits because they know everything I do in the car. And I'm like, okay, I already know. I don't care how good my credit is. They are absolutely turning me down for insurance. I can guarantee you that because of the way I drive. And because
of all the ladies he's pleasuring in the back of his Tesla.
Absolutely. But the data, who's the company? I won't go into that. But the data that the companies have on you right now is absolutely ridiculous. The data, and they're just now getting into this AI technology that's starting to crunch the data. Prior to AI, it was people crunching the data, and there was just so much data that was coming across, they could only, choose very, very small sub-segments to start crunching the data. Well, now the AI is coming in. The data that they can crunch on you, they can probably, they know more about you than you know about yourself. No joke. And and who's they, right? The they are private companies that are collecting the data. One of the largest data collecting providers out there, Plantar, they're about to go public. They've been a private company in Silicon Valley forever. I'm going to buy some of their stock because data is king in today's world. And I know it's like, oh, why would you buy stock in a company like that? Well, they're really good at it. And I've already said, you know what, you know everything about me, so I just don't care anymore. Really, I want all the technology. So you have to think about it. Anything that you have today that's convenient, that you think you're getting for free, like, oh, this technology is convenient, I'm getting it for free. Nothing's free. If you don't pay for it, you're exchanging data for it, right? And because of that exchange of data and because of the potential abuses of what these companies can do as it pertains to discrimination, they can figure out that I don't want to, and it's unfortunate, but they can say, listen, I don't want to loan to anyone that is a female between the ages of 30 and 35 that has some LGBT, some LGBT tendencies, that has red hair, that is a liberal, and is thinking about having a child. I mean, they could put all that data together and then ensure that those people don't see that. Or on the other hand, and the way it's presented to market is, hey, listen, if we can have all this data, we can give the right message to the right person. But what they don't say is we can also exclude the message from others. And that's what happens, unfortunately.
Yeah. I mean, and that's what came across when I was reading this, and I just thought, wow, this is really great. This is going to be our first part of a series of the economics of discrimination. We don't know if it's going to be 3 shows or if it's going to be 4 shows yet. We're just going to see how we go because a lot of stuff we didn't cover today. And when we come back with our second episode about the economics of discrimination, we are going to be talking about reparations. and the economic impact. And we are going to also let Zoe tell us about the protest songs that unfortunately we ran out of time to do today. So as always, if you guys have any feedback from us, please reach us on our Google number at 775-537-4352. Follow us on social media at Finance is the Other F Word. Find my book, Finance is the Other F Word, Another F Word to Love, on Amazon or Barnes & Noble or Target online. And find Stormy's #1 best-selling book, The World's Best Buyer Persona System, on Amazon by Stormy Andrews. And of course, make sure you follow Lily Lou Mittens on Instagram. And we will catch you guys in the next episode. Thanks for tuning in.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Cheers.
Thanks for listening. If you like us, subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.